Hello friends, welcome back to English Classes Online. My name is Benjamin. Today's video is on how to write a high-scoring essay in the West African Senior School Certificate Examination English, 15 Top Tips. This is part of our English Writing Skills series, and if you are new to this channel, kindly subscribe to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Click on the bell icon as well so that whenever a new video is uploaded on this channel, you will be notified instantly. Without much ado, let's dive into the lesson right away. First, let's take a look at the agenda for today's episode. Number one, why it is important to score high in the essay writing section of the West African Senior School Certificate Examination in English. Number two, a quick rundown of the types of writing to expect in the essay writing section. And number three, let's pick letter writing and examine it specifically with our spotlight on 15 top tips on how to write a high-scoring letter. We are going to look at this one by one. Why it is important to score high in the essay writing section of the West African Senior School Certificate Examination, the English papers. The essay writing section of this exam carries the highest marks in the West African School Certificate Examination English exam specifically. In the essay writing section, you are given 4 or 5 topics and you are required to write on only one of them. Yet, that single essay writing question carries 50 marks. Alright? So that's exactly how important this particular section of the exam is. It carries 50 marks. This implies that being able to write a good essay will enable you to score maximum marks in this section, and this will enhance your overall performance in the entire English exam. Number two, let's take a quick look or have a quick rundown of the types of writing to expect in the essay writing section of this WAEC exam. In the essay writing section of the West African Senior School Certificate English exam, questions are usually set on the following various topics. Number one, letter writing. 2, article writing. 3, general essays. 4, speech writing. 5, report writing. And 6, story writing. Now, the WAEC examiners can set questions on any of these areas of continuous writing. Of course, you will always expect questions on letter writing. That is really completely unavoidable. It is unheard of that you pick any WAEC question paper in English language and you do not find a question on letter writing. Sometimes you might even find 2 letter writing questions. Another section that features most of the time is article writing. Then, of course, general essays, sometimes optional. But you will always find speech writing. Report writing is somehow optional too, but another area of writing that is almost a permanent or regular feature is story writing. You will always find a question on story writing. But the most dominant or the most recurring of all of them is letter writing. From these various types of writing, 5 questions are usually set, and you are required to pick just one question and write on it in about 450 words. This one question carries 50 marks, as I earlier mentioned, and your score will depend on how you perform in the following areas of assessment. There are 4 parameters for assessing candidates' essays in the WAEC English exam. Number 1 is content, and this carries 10 marks. Content is about how far you have been able to write exactly what the question requires you to write. All right? Then the organization has to do with how far you are able to organize the various parts of the essay. Usually an essay has a definite structure. At least every essay has 3 major parts: the introduction, the body of the essay, and the conclusion. Then you have other features depending on the specific type of writing you are talking about. If it is a letter, then of course a letter has an address or addresses depending on the type of letter you are writing. So organization has to do with how you are able to arrange the various parts of the essay and put the various parts in their proper places. All right, that is organization, and you will score 10 marks if you get organization 100% right. Then expression carries 20 marks, and expression has to do with your accurate use of language and how clearly, how concisely, how accurately, how convincingly you are able to express your ideas. All right? If you are able to express your ideas in good English, express your ideas with clarity, then you are able to win maximum marks in expression. Then the 4th one is mechanical accuracy, and this has to do with how accurately or correctly you have been able to use the punctuation marks, your spelling, and other aspects, the use of tenses, your grammar, and everything. Mechanical accuracy has to do with all that. All right? So these are the things you ought to know. Then let's take a look at the West African Senior School Certificate Examination of June 2020, English Language 2, Theory Questions. Section A is essay writing, and let's look at the various questions. 5 questions in that particular section A, which is the essay writing section. So let's look at the questions that we are set in this year. That was last year. Number 1 is a letter writing question. Your brother, who is in the 3rd year in another school, has written to you, to confide in you that he is about to stop schooling and go into business. Write a letter to him advising him against the decision. So this is a letter writing question. Number 2, write an article suitable for publication in a national newspaper on the topic, the importance of promoting good reading habits in students. So this is an article writing question. All right. So let's now look at other questions 3 to 5. And you can see question 3 is another letter writing question. As the senior prefect of your school, write a letter to the principal pointing out at least 2 practices among students that should be discouraged and 2 habits that should be promoted among teachers. Then question number 4 is a speech writing question. A new principal has been posted to your school. Write a speech you will deliver at the welcome party organized for him, informing him about some of the problems faced by students. Question number 5, write a story that ends with the statement, I had never felt so embarrassed in my life. So you can see these are 5 questions. Now this question number 5 is the story writing question. So we can see the essay writing questions of this WAEC English exam of the year 2020. We have 5 questions, 2 letter writing questions, 1 article writing question, then 1 speech writing question, and 1 story writing question. So that is to give you, an idea about the types of questions to expect in the essay writing section of this exam. Then let's pick letter writing and examine it specifically. In this video, we want to look at one particular area, and that is letter writing. We have seen how important letter writing is seen by this examining body. In this particular 2020 exam, we have seen that they set 2 questions on letter writing, and that shows you that they see letter writing as a very important area of writing, and for that reason we want to look at it specifically in this video. Here are 15 top tips on how to write a high-scoring letter. We have already seen that 50 marks are allotted to essay writing, and you have to pick on just 1 question and write it. So if you are able to do it well and you are able to win maximum marks in this section, it will enable you to do exceedingly well, perform excellently in the entire exam. And you also know exactly that the English language is the most important subject in the West African School Certificate Examination. The reason being that the English language is really the particular subject that is required for admission into a higher institution in the West African countries. If you want to study law, mass communication, or any of the other courses that have to do with arts or the humanities, you must obtain at least a credit in English language, at least a credit in English language. If you fail to do that, of course, you won't gain admission into any of the universities or colleges of education. And of course, other subjects, are optional. If you are going to study an arts course in some universities might give you admission even if you fail to obtain a credit in mathematics. Mathematics becomes compulsory in some universities if you are going to study a science-based course. But if you are going to study an arts-based course, of course, you can be admitted in some universities once you obtain a credit in English and other core subjects for that course. But so far, English is the only subject that if you fail to obtain a credit in, you will never be offered admission into any university. All right? Whether you are going to study a science-based course or an arts-based course, you are required to obtain a credit in the English language. So it is important for you to learn the secrets, learn the keys that will enable you to write a high-scoring letter. And if you are able to do that, you'll be able to win maximum marks in the essay writing section, and all you will need is to, score some reasonable amount of marks in some other sections, and of course, you will excel in the English language. Now, tip number one, identify the type of letter you are asked to write. You have to know whether it is a formal letter, informal letter, or semi-formal letter. Let's examine one of the letter writing questions we saw in the 2020 English Language WAEC exam. Your brother, who is in the 3rd year in another school, has written to confide in you that he is about to stop schooling and go into business. Write a letter to him advising him against his decision. This is the West African Senior School Certificate Examination of June 2020. Now, how do we identify the type of letter this is? Now, number one, if you are asked to write a letter to someone who shares a personal relationship with you, then that is an informal letter. And this question I have read out is an example of a letter to someone who is related to you. So it's an informal type of letter because you are writing to your brother. You share a personal relationship with your brother. Now, how do we identify a formal letter? When you are asked to write a formal letter, you are asked to write to someone who occupies a particular office. And then you are asked to write to him, and he is not mentioned as someone who is related to you, but he is addressed by his official title. The other second letter writing question, which has to do with writing a letter to the principal of your school in your capacity as the senior prefect. That, of course, is a formal letter because you are writing to someone on the basis of the office he occupies, not on the basis of the personal relationship that he shares with you. That's quite different from this particular example here, in which you are asked to write a letter to your brother who is in the 3rd year in another school. All right, so then we have a third type of letter, which is a semi-formal letter. Now, a semi-formal letter can be identified by examining the purpose and the recipient, the person we are writing to. Again, that person is somebody you may know, all right, by name. Of course, you know the person by name, but you don't have a personal relationship per se you are not so close to the person. For example, if you are to write a letter to your landlord, of course, you know your landlord because you have some business relationship with the person. All right, but you cannot beat your chest and say this person is your personal friend or your relation. So a letter to this type of person is a semi-formal letter. If you write a letter to your professor, maybe you are studying uh, in the university and you have to write a letter to your professor requesting uh, for some favor, that is a semi-formal letter. If you are writing a letter to somebody who is probably a family friend but is not your age mate, right? Probably your father's friend or your mother's friend. If you are writing to this person, then it is a semi-formal letter because you are not going to talk to the person as you would talk to your classmate or as you would talk to your personal friend. So the level of formality is a little bit, uh, higher than a letter. In a letter you have to write to your personal friend or your classmate or your brother. All right, so these are the three types of letters, and we have examined how you can identify them. Now you will take note here from the examples of the past questions we have seen here that the examining body will not tell you the exact type of letter you have been asked to write. You are just asked to write a letter to someone, but from the description you should be able to know whether it is a formal letter, a semi-formal letter, or an informal letter. So the first thing you need to do is to identify the type of letter you are asked to write. Why must you identify the type of letter? Because the type of letter you are going to write determines how you are going to write it. If you are writing a formal letter, you are going to write two addresses, your own address as the writer and the address of the receiver. This is different from a letter you are going to write to somebody who is very close to you, such as this one. Your brother who is in the third year in another school has written to confide in you that he is about to stop schooling and go into business. Write a letter to him advising him against his decision. Now this is an informal letter and you are going to write only one address. Again, the salutation in a formal letter is different from the salutation in an informal letter, and that of a semi-formal letter also is different. So the key is this: you need to identify the type of letter you are asked to write, and once you identify this, then you will be able to write it, giving it its appropriate features and the tone and variety of language required in that type of letter will also be used. All this will enable you to score high in that particular letter. The second tip, very top tip, in order to score high, write a high scoring letter, is to find out the purpose of the letter. Now let's look at the second example in that particular past question paper that we have just examined. Now, as the senior prefect of your school, write a letter to the principal pointing out at least 2 practices among students that should be discouraged and 2 habits that should be promoted among teachers. So you can see that everything you are going to write here has to do with, the school environment. So it's really an official letter. You are discussing, you are writing this letter in your capacity as the senior prefect, and the purpose is to point out at least 2 practices among students that should be discouraged and 2 habits that should be promoted among teachers. Within the school community, this is really an official matter, and if the purpose is official, that shows you it is really a formal letter. So from the purpose of the letter, you will also be able to identify the type of letter you are asked to write. Now, we have been able to see here that the person you are writing to is not somebody who shares a personal relationship with you, like your brother who who was mentioned in the previous letter. If you are writing to your brother, then your brother has been specified as somebody who is related to you. But this is quite different from a letter to your principal. The principal is the head of an academic institution, and so that is an office, not a person per se, because the difference between a formal letter and an informal letter is that a formal letter is written to an office, while an informal letter is written to a person. You may not understand this quite clearly, but let me take it a little bit further. I can define a formal letter as an impersonal letter. It's not written to a person, it's written to an office, which is why it can be precisely called an official letter. From office, you derive the word official. Now, an informal letter can also be called a personal letter because you are writing to a person with whom you share a personal relationship, such as your brother. All right, so if you find out the purpose of the letter, then you will also be able to know whether it is a formal or an informal letter, and that will show you exactly what you are going to write. In the other example, you are going to write to your brother advising him against something, a decision he has taken, which he has confided in you about. So you are writing to him as a brother, not in any official capacity. That makes it an informal letter. But here you are writing to the principal in his capacity as the occupant of the office of the principal, and you are also writing to him in your capacity as the senior prefect of the school. So it's purely a formal letter. Number 3, writing the appropriate address or addresses. This is the 3rd tip you need to really pay attention to, because in writing a letter, you need to ensure that the various parts of the letter are captured. All right, and the first thing you find in a letter is the writer's address. So we can look at it here. Now, we are trying to look at the informal letter, the letter you are asked to write to your brother. So you can come up here with this address. Here we are using the block style, and here we have Alaba High School. We have a comma there. All right, I want you to look at the comma there. All right, there's a comma. Okay. Well, you have noted the comma there. Then you have Alaba, which is a location. You have a comma followed by Ojo, a comma, Lagos State, full stop. All right. Then what follows is the date, April 3, a comma, 2021, full stop. You can see this exactly is the address. Here we are using the block style, and you can see it is on a vertical position. But you can use the slanted style, which we are not going to concern ourselves with here. If you prefer the block style, this is how you are going to put it. And this block style is punctuated. It's called the closed block style. When it is closed, it means that it is well punctuated. You can see that we have used comma to indicate a pause until we get to the last item on the address, and we put a full stop. And then the date is written in this way, and then we put a full stop at the end of it. Then, of course, we are going to discuss this as part of the opening greetings or the salutation. You can see here that because we are writing an informal letter, we can come with this informal salutation. Dear Emeka, we call this our brother by his first name, all right, which you cannot do in a formal letter. All right, we shall see this quite clearly shortly. All right. Okay, so let's take a step further and look at tip number 4, and this has to do with using appropriate opening and closing greetings. All right. Now, in a formal letter, your opening greeting is dear sir or dear madam. Of course, I need to mention that, if you are writing a formal letter, you need to indicate the address of the receiver. Unlike the previous one, which is an informal letter, we have only the writer's address, and the receiver's address is not needed in an informal letter. If we are writing a letter to the principal, for instance, the writer's address will be here, and then the principal's address will be here, and that will be followed by dear sir or dear madam, depending on the gender of the recipient. All right. Okay, so then back to tip number 4, using appropriate opening and closing greetings. We have already said that in a formal letter, you need to open it with dear sir or dear madam, and the closing, which is appropriate to a formal letter, is yours faithfully. Yours faithfully. Then in a semi-formal letter, you can open it with dear, followed by the title of the receiver. Dear Mr. or dear Mrs. or dear Doctor or dear Professor Okon. Of course, after the title comes the surname of the person. If your landlord is Mr. Okon, then you write dear Mr. Okon. If she happens to be a landlady and the surname is Okon, you can say dear Mrs. Okon. Let's assume you are writing to a professor in your university. You can say dear Professor Akin, for instance. All right, so that is exactly how to open a semi-formal letter. Then closing it is always with yours sincerely. Yours sincerely. That is appropriate. Then in the case of an informal letter, you can write dear Jane, just as we wrote the previous example we saw. Dear Emeka, you address the person by his or her first name because of the level of familiarity. Then you can say dear sister, dear brother, dear father, dear mother, dear uncle, as the case may be, dear cousin. All right, and then the closing will be yours sincerely, or yours ever, or yours affectionately. Of course, you can also even use a different style of closing. You can say your brother Mark, your son Daniel, your daughter Rose. All right, so any of these can be used in an informal letter. All right, so we have looked at the appropriate opening and the appropriate closing, and we looked at this together so that you know that if you are writing a formal letter and you open with dear sir or dear madam, the closing should be yours faithfully. If in a semi-formal letter you open with dear Mr. Okon, of course the closing should be yours sincerely. If in a formal letter you write dear Jane, the closing should be yours sincerely or yours ever or yours affectionately. Or you can even say your brother Mark. So that is exactly the way to go so that you will win maximum marks. When you use the appropriate terminologies in your letter, you score maximum marks. Now, tip number 5, use a title or topic where necessary, and this applies to a formal letter only. Now, let's assume that you are asked to write a letter. Let's use the example we earlier saw in that 2020 English language exam. You are asked to write a letter to the principal of your school, and you are discussing the some negative habits among students that should be discouraged and some positive habits among teachers that should be encouraged. All right, so you have to come up with the appropriate title, and then you put it as a title, and it should come after salutation. Immediately after dear sir, then you put the title. It can be, negative habits that should be encouraged, that should be discouraged among students, and positive habits to be encouraged among teachers. All right, you just come up with a topic. It should not be too long, but during your brainstorming session, you'll be able to come up with an appropriate topic. If you are asked to write a letter to the chairman of your local government area requesting for certain amenities that are needed in your community, then you just come up with a title, request for social amenities needed in my community. You can mention the name of your community. That can be the appropriate topic for that letter. That every formal letter needs a topic or a title, and of course it only applies to the formal letter. You don't need to write any title or topic when writing an informal letter or a semi-formal letter. All right, so tip number 6, start your letter with an appropriate introduction. And when we are talking about introduction, we are concerned with paragraph 1. The first paragraph is what you use to introduce your letter. Now, let's look at formal and semi-formal letter. You can start it like this: I am writing to inform you that, all right? Or I am writing to draw your attention to. This second opening statement or introductory statement can be used when you are writing a letter of complaint. Let's assume you are asked to write a letter to the Minister of Works in your country complaining about the deplorable condition of roads in your state, and suggesting ways or to solve the problem, or requesting for urgent action in remedying that ugly situation. You can start it with this second one: I am writing to draw your attention to the deplorable condition of roads in my state. All right, so to draw your attention to, you can, if you are writing a letter that is meant to ask for information, you can write it, you can start it like this. I am writing to inquire about, if you are asking for information. Or you can generally say, I am writing in connection with, so these are possible ways of introducing a formal or a semi-formal letter. Don't forget that a semi-formal letter is also required to go straight to the purpose of the letter. It's not a kind of letter that requires your, exchanging some pleasantries, no, or making inquiries about the receiver's welfare. You can only do that in an informal letter. But in a formal letter, you go straight to the purpose of the letter. If it is a letter of application, you can say, I am writing to apply for the post of a sales manager in your company, or something like that. You go straight to the purpose of the letter and you introduce the subject for discussion. In an informal letter, you are allowed to start with this very familiar exchange of pleasantries. How are you doing? How are you doing today? Or how are you doing? I hope you and your family are all well, or I hope your business is doing well. If you are writing to your brother who is schooling in another place, you can even inquire about his studies. How are your studies, or how are things going in your school? You can inquire about his welfare, about his studies. These kinds of words are allowed in an informal letter. You can even go to the extent of just using some of the terms, some of the expressions you use if you were to talk with the person face to face. You can say, it's been quite long since we were last in touch, or it's been quite a long time since we met. All right, so such expressions can be allowed when you are introducing an informal letter, because each letter shows the level of formality or informality, and it is a reflection of how familiar or unfamiliar you are with the person you are writing to. And I want to mention here that there is a correlation between the way we speak to people when we meet them face to face and the way we write to them. Of course, if you meet your brother or your classmate, the way you would speak to the person is different than the way you would speak to your principal if you were to meet your principal in his office or anywhere. All right, so the way we write to people is not different from the way we speak to them. So that is exactly what we ought to know. Now, tip number 7, create an outline for the content of your letter. Is very important, because if you fail to create an outline, it means you have failed to plan this essay. And I want to emphasize here that planning is very important in everything we do, to the extent that people have said that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. And there is much truth in that saying, because if you want to build a good house, you have to plan it beforehand. You don't just go and start digging foundation and putting blocks anywhere you like. Otherwise, chances are that you might situate your toilet where your bedroom is expected to be situated. But if you plan it, then all the various positions of your rooms and toilet facilities and kitchen and balcony, they will all be clearly spelled out. And a similar thing is required in when it comes to planning your writing. If you fail to plan and you jump into writing, then you may keep writing, and if when you get to the middle of your writing, you now discover that you have misplaced the points you want to discuss, and that will actually spoil your day in that exam, because at that point in time you will be in a fix. Are you going to cancel what you have written already, having spent a lot of time writing, and now you have to cancel it and start afresh? So you need to plan your essay before you write it. So in your planning, creating an outline is really the end product of your planning, because you take a little time to brainstorm, to think about what you are going to write, organize your thoughts, and then you jot down the main points you are going to use in this writing, and you plan it in such a way that in your outline you already have a sketch of the structure of your writing, so that when you start writing, you know exactly where to put what. All right, now let's look at this particular letter. Your brother, who is in the 3rd year in another school, has written to confide in you that he is about to stop schooling and go into business. Write a letter to him advising him against his decision. Now, here, for us to really create an outline for the content, it's just something simple. Just jot down the points that you are going to discuss. You may come up with at least 3 points here when you are discussing in the body of your essay in any WAEC English exam. It is advisable to discuss at least 3 points. All right, at least 3 points. Sometimes you are asked to write at least 3 points, to discuss at least 3 points. Sometimes you may be asked to discuss at least 2 points, but in the other letter to the principal, we have seen that you are asked to discuss 4 points. 2 points, 2 habits to be discouraged among students, and 2 habits to be encouraged among teachers. Altogether 4. So, but in some cases, when it is not specified, then you should discuss at least 3 main points. And so when you create outline in a letter writing assignment exercise or task such as the one we are examining, you can come up with just 3 main points. What are you going to tell your brother? What are the reasons, why you would advise him to not to drop out of school? Number 1, you can tell him that his dropping out of school will offend your parents. That's a major reason. Every good child would not like to do something that will be offensive to the parents. So that's a cogent point. Number 2, you can say that your brother needs education. Even though he wants to go into business, he should complete his secondary education, because you believe that even in business, attaining a certain level of education is necessary, especially in today's information-driven global economy. You can argue that to do business to a certain level, which may require importing or exporting, dealing in international business, at least he requires a certain level of education. That can be a cogent point too. Then the 3rd one is that you can also remind him that in future he might want to vie for a political office in the country, such as aspiring to become the president of a country, or the governor of a state, or at least a minister or a commissioner. And there is a minimum qualification, academic qualification required of someone. So this can be very cogent reasons to discourage your brother from dropping out of school in his third year at secondary school. Now, once you have jotted down these points, you have made your writing, you have simplified it so that when you start writing, you know which point to discuss in one paragraph, another point in another paragraph, the last point in the next paragraph. And so everything will just fall into place beautifully. Planning is important. So create an outline for the content of your letter, all right? Tip number 8, divide the body of your letter into paragraphs. Of course, the body of your letter starts with paragraph 2. We have already seen that your introduction for your letter takes paragraph 1, all right? And once it takes paragraph 1, the body of your letter will begin with paragraph 2. And in every essay you are expected to write in the WAEC exam, you are expected to write discuss at least 3 main points in the body of your essay or letter, as the case may be. And this actually gives us the idea that a 5-paragraph essay is ideal in a WAEC exam. Now, how do I mean? Of course, you already have your first paragraph for introduction and the last paragraph for conclusion. If you discuss 3 points in the body of your letter, you are going to use 3 paragraphs to discuss these 3 points. And so that will give you a 5-paragraph letter. All right? So it is also important that when you begin to discuss this, to develop the body paragraphs, then from your outline, as we saw in our previous discussion, you can take point 1, which has to do with, telling your brother to, drop that idea, because dropping out of school will actually offend your parents. And as a good child, he doesn't want to do something that will be offensive to your parents. Now, you discuss this first point in paragraph 2. And when you start discussing paragraph 2, you can begin with what we call a topic sentence. Make a statement that captures that main idea. Then write 2 or 3 more sentences to prove the points you have already raised. All right? So, and then you go to the next one and you begin it with a topic sentence and give additional sentences which we call supporting details. Giving some supports or to buttress the point you have already raised. All right? So this is exactly the way to go. Divide the body of your letter into paragraphs. And of course, that if you are writing, you can use 2 possible ways to indicate paragraphs. Now, if this actually is, this is the margin, and then of course you have another margin here, you have this space to write with. Now, you may begin by leaving a space here to indicate your first paragraph. All right? And you can start here. How are you doing? All that, blah, blah, blah. All right? So then when you are writing other sentences, they will all occupy the whole of this place. All right? And then when you want to write paragraph 2, you start here. You see, in the same position. All right? So that is the way to go. And this is what we call indentation. you leave a space here, you know, and then you start the first sentence, you know, after leaving a space, and then other lines will start from the margin. But when you want to start a new paragraph, then you start from this point again. And this is a way to organize your paragraphs so that your work will look organized. Don't forget that one of the parameters for assessing your essay in the WAEC exam is organization. And it has to do with how well you organize your paragraphs, how well you organize, you know, different parts of your essay, how well you indicate your introduction, how well you indicate your conclusion, and all that. Then there is an alternative way of, you know, indicating your paragraph. You may begin from the margin, all right, and then you continue writing like that. But when you are through with the first paragraph, you leave a space, you leave a line, all right, and then you begin the second paragraph here, all right, and then you continue to write. And when you are through with that, you leave another space, and then you start here, you leave a line to indicate a new paragraph. All right, I will personally emphasize that this style of writing could be more appropriate if you were to submit a typewritten letter. But in the WAEC exam, you are expected to write in your handwriting. So it is better to use the indentation method. You leave a space, all right? You leave a space to indicate each paragraph. You can use that for the purpose of this exam, since it is a handwritten letter, not a typed one, all right? Okay, so let's move on. Tip number 9, make sure you discuss at least the specified number of points. For example, look at this particular question. You are dissatisfied with some practices in your school. Write a letter to your friend in another school discussing at least 3 of these practices and the improvement you desire. I forgot to indicate the year for this past question, but precisely you will find it either in 2018 or 2019 of the WAEC exam. All right, so this is one of the letter writing questions, but the emphasis I want to make here is that you need to discuss at least the specified number of points. Here, the number of points you are asked to discuss is specified. You know, discussing at least 3 of these practices and the improvement you desire. So we are saying that you should ensure that you discuss at least 3 of these practices. You may discuss 4 or more, but it should be at least 3. But don't forget that, you know, since you are asked to discuss at least 3, you can just discuss 3, bearing in mind that you don't have all the time on your hands, and you need to actually, you know, plan and manage your time well, so that you won't find yourself being unable to cross-check what you have written if you spend too much time writing the essay. All right, so that is exactly for tip number 9. Make sure you discuss at least the specified number of points. Tip number 10, use the last paragraph for conclusion. Of course, as I earlier mentioned, it is ideal to write a 5-paragraph letter, especially when you are expected to discuss 3 key points in the body of your letter. And then your first paragraph is where you introduce the purpose of your writing. Then the last paragraph is where you summarize or bring the writing to a close, and then you discuss the 3 points in the body of your letter, which will require 3 paragraphs to develop. And so here you are going to write a 5-paragraph essay. But in this tip number 10, we are concerned with the last paragraph, which you are going to use for conclusion. You need to use this last paragraph to make the appropriate call for action, or simply to re-emphasize the key points already discussed. In the opening paragraph, you let the writer know why this writing has become important and what exactly it is that you want to say in this piece of writing. All right? But when you come to the last paragraph, this is where you bring your writing to a close, and you can do it in several different ways. You may, say something that will, make a lasting impression on the receiver, or you can simply make a call to action. For example, you are writing a letter to advise your brother against his decision to drop out of school. All right, so you can conclude by emphasizing, or by making a call to action that in view of the reasons you have discussed, which are very clear reasons, very cogent reasons, you are advising him strongly to change his mind or to rescind his decision. That specific call to action is very appropriate, and that could be a very smart way to really bring your writing to a close, because that exactly is the purpose of this writing. Now, tip number 11, write your signature and name appropriately after the closing greetings. And of course, the 3 different types of letters have their different ways of bringing them to a close. When we need to write append our signature and write our full name. Obviously it is in a formal letter. We have earlier said you are going to end this formal letter with yours faithfully, and then after that you are expected to append your signature. So you sign your signature after yours faithfully. After yours faithfully, of course, you are going to put a comma. Now look at it this way, yours faithfully, and yours has to begin with a capital letter Y. All right, so yours faithfully. All right, then the F should be small letter. All right, not big one, not a capital letter. So let's look at it this way, yours faithfully. All right, then you put a comma, and here you sign your signature. All right, you sign your signature immediately after that, and then you can then write your full name beginning with your surname. You can then write Okon David. All right, Okon David. All right, so this can actually be how to end a formal letter. Okon David. You can put a full stop here. Yours faithfully, comma, then followed with a signature, and then Okon David. All right, Okon David. So if it is a semi-formal letter, you can write yours sincerely and then put your full name. So here the difference is that if it's a semi-formal letter, you are not writing yours faithfully, you write yours sincerely, put a comma, and then there will be no signature here. You simply write Okon David. Then if it is an informal letter, you can write yours sincerely or yours ever, or yours affectionately. If you are writing to your mother, for instance, you share some degree of affection with your mother, and so you can say yours affectionately or affectionately yours. And once you have written yours sincerely or yours affectionately, as the case may be, after a comma, you simply write your first name, yours affectionately, comma, Rose, full stop. All right? So that is exactly how to bring your letter to a close. After your conclusion, then you need a signature only in a formal letter, and you need your full name. In a semi-formal letter, it is yours sincerely followed by your full name. Signature is not necessary here. Then informal letter, yours sincerely, no signature, and only your first name is needed here. All these reflect the level of familiarity or unfamiliarity, as the case may be, or formality, as if you like. All right, so that is exactly the way to go, so that you will be able to write a high scoring letter that will win you maximum marks in this exam. Tip number 12: use the appropriate language variety and tone for your letter. Let's look at examples. In a formal letter, you need to use a standard expression. Standard expressions, of course, you need to write in standard English, all right? Then the tone will be formal, and that also implies that there are no short forms that will be required. Short forms such as I don't, or I'll, or I won't, so such short forms are not advisable in a formal letter. Neither are you expected to use jokes or slang expressions. All right, so you need to avoid all these. In a semi-formal letter too, you need to use standard and polite expressions. All right. Then in an informal letter, this is where short forms are acceptable. You can use short forms like don't, won't, shan't, and so on and so forth. Then you can share some jokes that are relevant, but you don't have to really descend into the gutter to share some jokes that are not appropriate. And again, you need to understand that informal letters are of different types and of different degrees of formality or otherwise. For example, if you are writing a letter to your uncle who is your father's brother, the tone of the letter will be different from the letter you write to your classmates or your friend who is of the same age with you. If you are writing to your father, the tone will be different from a letter you write to your younger brother, for example. So you need to understand that the way you talk to your father is almost the way you will write to him. The way you talk to your younger brother will be, will be reflected in the way you write to him. So informal language should reflect the level of familiarity you share with the receiver. All right, so that is exactly what you need to know. You should use the appropriate language variety and the tone for your letter. This is exactly one of the points the examiner will be looking for. He wants to ensure that the language you use in your letter is appropriate to the type of letter you are writing. And that is really very important. That will affect the marks you will score in your letter. Then the next point, which is tip number 13, is that you need to write the required length of 450 words You know, in a WAEC English exam, your essay is expected to cover 450 words. Now, how do you actually calculate this? You know, a lot of people get confused as to how are they going to start counting the word, every word they write one by one. No, you don't have the time to do that. And of course, because it is handwritten, you won't have any device that will give you the word count automatically as a computer would do. So you need to devise a smart way of, you know, coming up with the approximate number. For example, what do? You divide 450 words by the number of words you write per line to determine how many lines you ought to write. For example, if you always check your writing and you discover you usually write 10 words per line, this means you are going to write 45 lines in your essay. And how do we get 45 lines? 450 divided by 10 will give you 45. If you usually write 9 words per line, you have to write 50 lines. And again, that is 450 divided by 9 will give you 50 lines. What if you are writing 8 words per line? You are going to write approximately 56 or 57. If you are writing 7 words, because it depends on, you know, how bold your writing is. Some people write very bold letters so it covers space, and so where someone may write 10 words per line, another person may write probably 7 words per line. So if you discover you are writing 7 words, if you divide 450 by 7, you will have probably 64 or 65 lines to write. So this is how to really try to figure out how you are going to get 450 words. And I must emphasize here that this comes with practice. That is why if you are preparing to sit any English exam in which you are going to write an essay, you need to practice writing. Practice, practice, practice. Because perfection comes with practice. It is said that practice makes perfect. You need to practice. With practice, you'll be able to know exactly how you can write approximately 450 words without, you know, without really paying too much attention to it. It can just come naturally with practice. Then tip number 14, use clear, readable handwriting. As we have already said, you are expected to submit a handwritten essay. You are not going to type it, you know, because as at today, in the WAEC exam, you are expected to write by hand. It is in the JAM, for example, people are now allowed to use the computer. In the West African Senior School Certificate Examination, the use of the computer has not yet been introduced, so the candidates are required to write by hand. And this is where, you know, a clear, legible handwriting becomes necessary. You must avoid writing in an unclear or illegible handwriting. If you are going to write any exam, to sit any exam, and you are going to write an essay, you don't have to use any, you know, let's assume you are a doctor and you are going to sit an English exam to write an essay. You don't have to come with this medical style of writing, which is known only to people in that profession. No, if you do that, you might probably score 0, because if the examiner can't read what you have written, you have failed. All right? So this is really very important. Make sure you write very legible, you know, write legibly so that your words will be clear to the person who is going to mark your script, and that will actually enable you to avoid losing marks for poor or illegible handwriting. Now, tip number 15, which is the last but not the least, is to make sure you cross-check your letter and correct all errors such as spelling errors, grammar errors, punctuation errors. Use your time well to ensure you have enough time for proofreading and correction before submitting your scripts. So I hope you have really learned quite a lot from the 15 top tips I have shared with you to enable you write a high scoring essay in your WAEC English exam. We have been looking at how to write a high scoring essay in the West African Senior School Certificate Examination English, and our focus has been on 15 top tips for getting it right and scoring high in this section of the exam. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, like the video and share it with your friends and relations. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly subscribe to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Click on the bell icon as well so that whenever a new video is uploaded, you will be notified instantly. If you have any questions, any suggestions, any commendations, any concerns you have, kindly leave your comments on the comments section below. You will find also in the description section various links to other related videos that will help you in learning various areas of English language proficiency. I want to thank you for being part of today's video. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Goodbye for now and remain blessed.